Mr. Dalrymple, technicalities aside, how was the journey in mentally preparing yourself and the team that hybrid is the way forward?
Well, I mean, I think, let's be realistic. What we love is the festival live on the ground,
Yes.
and I don't think anyone would pretend that Zoom and digital is all our preferred choice. That half the fun of any festival is being on the ground,
Right.
meeting people, going to get the chai, the gorgeous weather, the Rajasthani architecture, the parties in the evening, meeting the speakers firsthand.
Right.
And all that is something which we have missed so badly, and which I'm so looking forward to having again in the flesh in 10 days. But you can still get an awful lot out of digital, and both as a festival organizer and as a participant and as a speaker. It's obviously something which has blossomed over the last 2 years. However, in a sense, we have come to associate Zoom partly with being stuck at home and not being able to do the other stuff. It is also, I mean, it has also been a wonderful escape for us all from our reduced circumstances, from the fact that we can't travel and we can't get out, and so much the last 2 years has been spent at home.
Right.
And I've had some fantastic sessions online since the beginning of the lockdown. We had that first. We were very quick off the mark and went straight into Zoom within about a couple of weeks of lockdown. And then we had the festival last year, and now we're doing this hybrid. So, I mean, obviously, it's no one's pretending that it's a substitute for the real big whiz bang, full on Jaipur experience that we all love and miss. But it's allowed us to do a lot of the stuff that otherwise would not have been possible. And has been a lifeline, I think, for many people. I mean, I get so many letters from people who say that they've discovered such and such a wonderful author from watching these sessions, and the figures have been extraordinary. Sanjoy will give you the figures, but they're in the tens of millions now. Some of our sessions, the total view downloads, and whole industries of podcasts and so on have been launched through this sort of thing. So we have a lot to be thankful for, and thank God for Zoom, frankly.
Okay. And what about the authors, especially from abroad, attending the physical festival? So
again,
the authors, especially from abroad, who would be attending the physical festival?
I'm just looking at the list now. I asked for it, and we've got incredible. I'm surprised how many are still coming, because obviously many were worried about the pandemic and so on. But an awful lot of extraordinary authors are coming. You better check all these names I'm about to give you, because they might not all be in the flesh, but I believe they are. So in the flesh, our superstars are. I've got Andrew Lowney, who is the fantastic biographer of Mountbatten, who's been kicking up all this fuss about the why are they still secret, and how can we get our hands in raising money by crowdfunding to try and get the most intimate letters of Edwina Mountbatten out of the safes, and Dickie. And he is the best sort of troublemaker writer who will not take no from authority. An author I'm very excited about, new star on the block from here, Anirudh Kanasetti, who's Lords of the Deccan, has been one of the big hits, and has completely revivified the writing of history of early South and Central India, the Deccan. And he's a star performer already on podcasts, so many people are familiar with him, but we are presenting him in the flesh. Kat Jarman, who is this wonderful Scandinavian archaeologist who's discovered how much of the Vikings' money and economy came out of the East, out of Baghdad, and they traded even with Gujarat. Who knew? I didn't. And there was a whole fashion for Gujarati amber beads, which apparently it was all the rage in the Viking age. Anyway, she's great. She's a proper archaeologist. One of my great literary heroes, Colin Thubron, who has been twice before, I think, with his new book, very topical, on the Chinese-Russian border area, the Amur River. Fantastic speaker. um, DBC Pierre, Booker Prize winner,
Yes.
Jeet Thile, Jeffrey Gettleman, who is the former New York Times correspondent and Pulitzer winner, Catherine Pangonis, who's a bright spark, who's an up-and-coming star, who is writing on the Queens of Jerusalem, Mark David Baer, who's had a massive hit on his book on the Ottomans,
Right.
new star from Oxford, Mariam Aslani, who is writing on peasants, so very much on how people are exploiting farmers around the world. And she has,
Okay.
a lot of the stuff that's been discussed here is if only the farmers in India are feeling the squeeze. It's actually a global thing, and it's happening everywhere in very similar ways to the dramas we've seen here in the last year. So giving a bit of international context.
Right.
Shehan Karunatilaka, who is an old star, just produced his new book, fantastic writer. Yashashwini Chandra, whose book on the horse was one of the great hits of last year. Vikram Sampat, who's been in the news a great deal. Who else? Robert Macfarlane, the world's greatest nature writer and the great star of travel writing. I had no idea that all these people are still coming. I'm very thrilled seeing this list, because I was aware that once we had the last lockdown, many people were dropping out. Many people seem to come back again, so I'm thrilled. Then online, we have a whole variety of megastars, including the Nobel Prize winner Abdul Razak Gurna,
right,
this year's big Nobel Prize winner. Akash Kapoor, whose book on Oroville has caused huge waves and won many extraordinary reviews. An awful lot of archaeology and early history, Himanshu Prabhu Rai, Andrea Akri, Charlotte Higgins on Greek myths, Combe Toybin, one of the world's greatest writers, the greatest writer in Ireland, Faisal Devji from Oxford, Ilan Pape from Israel, Lisa Taddeo, whose book on women's sexuality was a massive hit last year, Marina Warner from All Souls, Maya Jasnoff from Harvard, Monica Ali, who's just put a new book called Arranged Marriage, which is a follow-up to Brick Lane. Patrick Radden Keefe, who won the big non-fiction prize this year, the what's it called? The Bailey Gifford Prize on his story of Sackler and the opiate crisis.
Right.
Reuben Everett, the actor, has written a fantastic memoir. It's an amazing list. I'm so pleased. I'm just looking at it here. I'm very thrilled to see how much is still up and running.
Right. Was it tough convincing them to come?
Well, I mean, obviously, quite understandably, many did fall out in January when we had the Omicron was looking terrifying, and we didn't know how it was going to pan out. And it's only actually fun enough now, looking at it here, there is how many are still very much on. Okay. Steven Pinker, one of the great non-fiction writers of our time, Vidit Hedger, arguably the greatest art historian, along with B.N. Goswami. It goes on and on and on. So we're up and running.
Great. And how is your work on the Golden Road going?
Very well. I'm not writing yet, but I'm heading towards the end of the research. I managed to get in the window into. One of the problems was I couldn't get to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat and Borobudur for a long time, and for a whole year and a half, they weren't letting the order. And that's obviously still the case in China.
Right.
But I managed to get into Cambodia and into all over Indonesia, which was fantastic, and in Singapore.
So considering you do such extensive research, so how did you manage during the lockdowns?
Well, of all the people in the world, I have to say writers probably were the least affected, in that when we're getting on with our work, as opposed to when we're going for jollies at literary festivals or lecturing or doing all the other things we do. When we're actually working, it's no different from lockdown. It's very, very familiar.
Right.
And I know that many writers have said that they've done more work in the last 2 years than they did in the last 10. Okay. And I certainly have had, I'd just come back from the Anarchy tour when the first lockdown happened. I'd been in a different bed every night in Britain, then America, then all over Europe, then all India, then Australia and New Zealand. And I was completely exhausted after 4 or 5 months of telling exactly the same stories night after night.
Right.
and arrived back home longing to sit down and see my family and then got locked up with them for the next 3 months. So it was perfect timing. And by the time that I had 3.5 months where I didn't leave the farm. I literally didn't even go out in the lane outside. We all had that siege mentality. And by the time that I left the farm, I'd already written a proposal for the next book and knew exactly how I was going to do it, and everything had come together. I didn't even know what I was going to write when I came back from New Zealand 3 months later.
Right.
And the whole idea for Golden Road came that. So I have to thank that. And as I say, in a sense, the enemy of hard work for us writers is the temptation to go to many literary festivals and have the fun of meeting your authors and the acclaim and all the lovely things that literary festivals bring to lonely writers sitting at home with their keypads.
Right.
And I'd had 3 months of that. So really, I'm happy as Larry. I've been forced to concentrate, forced to work hard.
Okay.
And then finally got a bit of travel this autumn, and now I've got to sit down and write this book.
Right. And you must be following up on the news today. Russia's attacked Ukraine. So someone who's written so extensively on colonialism, how do you take it? How do you look at it?
Well, we all thought colonialism was over. But Putin's speech about questioning the sovereignty of
Ukraine.
I'm not an Indian, and I'm not anyone to tell the government here what they should and shouldn't do in their foreign policy. But it seems to me very short-sighted to sit on one's hands and when a nation state with the United Nations seat is being invaded, and not a word of criticism from here. It's this can backfire. I think it's very important for democracies to stand up for the sovereignty of the Ukraine, because who knows who will be the next, whether it's Russia, which won't be a problem for here, but what it will be if China moves.
Right.
And we know how strong and how technologically advanced China is at the moment and how rich it is.
Right.
Russia cannot afford a prolonged war, but China can definitely afford whatever it wants.
So also, in general, how open is the Indian publishing industry to historical and narrative nonfiction? When you entered the space, you were the only one.
I certainly felt that I was, it wasn't a problem in the sense that although people didn't quite know what I was, and a lot of people were describing my books that I'd spent 5 years researching minutely with 100 pages of footnotes as novels when they first started appearing 20 years ago. And I would have to explain to them, there's not a single thing in here that hasn't got a footnote. It is a work of nonfiction. Just because it has characters and even love stories doesn't mean they're not true. It's minutely researched. Now, as you say, many people are doing that. And it was a weird absence, because in Britain and America and France and Italy, narrative nonfiction was selling as well as fiction. But India, which had this spectacular tradition of writing fiction, and when I published White Moguls 20 years ago, India was Arundhati Roy just won the Booker, Kiran Desai just won the Booker. And India was very much, the center. It seemed to be the center of world fiction, but it was nowhere to be seen on the non-fiction.
Right.
That has changed now. We have some wonderful new writers, many of whom will be at Jaipur, and there's a huge appetite, from every side of the spectrum. I mean, the prominence of Vikram Sampat's books. I don't share his politics, but he's. The amount of interest that his books have caused, it shows that across the political board, there is a thirst for this sort of thing. From right-wing historians such as him and Sanjeev Sanyal, through centrists such as Ram Guha, myself, through to the left, there is a lot of narrative nonfiction being written now from all sides of the political spectrum.
Right. So, I was there to see the Traveler's Eye at Badhera, where we met also. And are you still shooting with your smartphone?
I
And
now have a slightly smarter smartphone. I've got something called a Z Fold as from last
Okay.
month, which is a very posh phone, but still a Samsung.
Okay.
And I'm having a show. I had a show at Madeira a month ago,
Okay.
and I am having another one in Baroda
Okay.
next month. So yeah, no, very much. I really enjoyed. As I say, it uses a different side of your brain
Yeah.
to the side that you use when you're thinking about writing a book.
But you've
More
been in
visual.
photography since childhood.
Say again?
You've been fond of photography since childhood.
Absolutely, but I haven't had the chance to have the kind of shows I have now, and it's a very very nice adjunct, and it fits obviously very well into you asked about my travels. I've been in all over Angkor Wat alone. I mean, normally Angkor has millions of tourists. I was alone there. I was alone for 2 days with no one else inside Borobudur, entirely on my own, and I've never had such a wonderful. That was like a child in a sweet shop, with an unlimited budget. It was a fantastic thing. So yeah, so the travels for the Golden Road have produced some wonderful opportunities for photography as well as for writing and research.
Okay, and these photographs will also be in black and white.
These photographs will also be in black and white. I've also got a new project coming, which is I'm just about to launch a podcast.
Okay.
With my old collaborator Anita Anand, with whom I wrote Kohinoor. It's called Empires.
All right.
And it'll be starting next month. Starting next week, I think, even possibly. We'll see. And it's on so that's a very exciting new venture, and very much on the same sort of themes that we've been dealing with at Jaipur, but this will be for download and for listening rather than for live.
Right. Wonderful. So your son's debut book is all set to release this year.
No, I won't. I mean, the press have said it's. I think, like my book, I suspect that neither of us will quite finish by the end of this year, and I think both of us will be actually producing our books roughly in the middle of next year, I suspect, rather than this year. But it's been great. And again, he's been forced to concentrate during lockdown, and we had at one stage we had him writing his book, him researching his book, me researching my book.
Yeah,
I was writing my proposal, he was writing his proposal, and his brother was doing a history thesis on alcohol and drugs at the Mughal court. for his master's thesis. So we had 3 historians all sharing anecdotes the whole of lockdown. I've no family, I think, had it so light. We had a fantastically productive and interesting lockdown.
Yes. How does it feel to have another writer around?
It's lovely, absolutely lovely. And the only irritating thing is my books sort of disappeared. I was off to Bikaner last week and couldn't find a wonderful book on Bikaner written by Naveen Patnaik before he became a chief minister.
Right.
And I went through all my bookshelves and was tearing my hair out. Then, of course, it turned up that Sammy had got it. But other than that, it's other than stealing my books, it's an enormous pleasure. I mean, it's very nice for anyone to. There's no guarantee, however close you are to your children are going to share your interests, and many families have fathers and sons, or sons and daughters, and that have completely different interests. This is perfect because we overlap in our interests, but his is a different period of history. He's much more into contemporary and 20th century history, while I sort of stopped dead at 1857.
Okay.
And I'm learning a lot from him. As I say, I went to Bikaner last weekend, and he was telling me all sorts of anecdotes and stories I'd never heard of, and places I must go and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
I think it's the final sign that we've become Indian. We've got another family business.
Yes. And I know you must have been asked this a million times, but I'd really like to know your process.
I'm going to have to give you only a very brief answer to come, because I've got a JLS session beginning in 3 minutes.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, a very simple process. I spend 2 or 3 years researching.
Yeah.
Start with secondary sources and read, what's been written before on the subject. Then, using the footnotes from there, start working on the primary sources in archives and in this book, inscriptions and archaeology and art history.
Right.
Travel around the places. I have a double thing for note taking. One is the card indexes, which I've currently got 4 for this book, absolutely jammed pack, and a dateline, which is nearly 1,000 pages long for this one. It's going to be a long book, this.
Okay.
When all my ducks are in a row, I start writing, and I try and write quickly after what usually 3 years of research, sometimes 4.
Okay.
And the thing is, I liken it to Chinese cookery. The key is to get all your stuff cut up, diced, marinated, ready to really know your subject. And only then do you start writing. And if you know your stuff, and if you know where all the pieces are going to go, and if you have the book very clearly in your head before you start writing, you don't get writer's rock. You can write fast. And Anarchy certainly was probably the fastest I've ever written a book, I think. And it came very smoothly. This one is going to be much more difficult because it's a much more diffuse narrative, and it's material I know, frankly, much less well. I mean, I've spent 20 years writing about the East India Company, and this will be my first time writing about a lot of these subjects. I've never written about Southeast Asia before, for example, other than a few articles. But I'm looking forward to it. But Skand, I'm afraid I must go.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely.
And if there's any other things, I think you have my WhatsApp. If you have
yes, I do. I do.
So,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have to go do a session now.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.